that this special issue on media and from a legal and also political perspective might contribute to our general debate very well. So the floor is yours, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been very often to Budapest, but during the last years it was not possible, and therefore I'm especially grateful to be here, especially if I'm a little bit older guy, can go to the Christmas market, which is somehow fabulous. Let me first talk a little bit about the issues raised before. One issue, I'm from the city of Dortmund. I'm professor in Münster, but Dortmund is very close. There is Borussia Dortmund, whom a few people might know. And in our Dortmund city, Qatar is boycotted to a large extent. And there has been a movement from, let's say, the radical football players. We have each second Saturday 80,000 people in the stadium, and it matters what the Southern Front, how we call it, in the stadium says, and they were against Qatar pretty early. I'm not aware how many restaurants actually give access to the TV set and so on. I think Germany plays tomorrow, and I'm not very clear whether I will look it or not. Probably I let my wife decide, like always. Then to the Polish situation, your Polish report, which is quite a change, or quite important, I think, for the future development. Maybe we can discuss it later, because then I'm totally out of my talk, and I'm probably not allowed to do this. And there is a very complex situation coming up, which has to do also with German history, with the German military situation, maybe also with my generation, who has some experience which somehow fall apart during the last year. So maybe we just discuss it later. I'm closer to the first talk because what you can observe in the European level, on the European level, is that there is a shift of policy from 2020 on, which definitely leads to a more coherent strategy of the EU. Whether this is already a federalistic state or a step to a federalistic state, I would rather reject. It is not in your vision, but it is definitely more centralization than you saw before. In the media sector, we had almost no initiatives of the EU up to 2020. There are just, procedural rules or some rules which I observed today in my hotel room when I looked at your TV stations. For example, they show that there is advertisement, and with I don't know, I forgot the name in your language, and then the advertisement starts. For example, this is a rule that is laid down in the European broadcasting rules. So on this level, we had rules, but if it comes to opening a public discourse, which is the prerequisite for democracy, the EU didn't act. Why did the EU did not act? Because it is very difficult to argue that the EU has jurisdiction at all. You know that Europe has not jurisdiction for everything. You have to go into the EU treaty and give reasons why the EU can act. If it comes to advertisement, it's easy. This is the competence to give rules for creating a common market. If it comes to democracy, to freedom of speech, to open up a pluralistic media landscape, it is not so easy. However, especially because of the situation, let's say worldwide, after the elections of President Trump, there has been, I guess, similar discussions everywhere. What is the relevance of disinformation? Are there any filter bubbles created by the big platforms? does the new media, it's a technological change, and you talked about algorithm. Basically, it's an algorithm-based communication sector that developed during the last 15 years. The smartphone, which is now for my students the most important device, has been or was created in 2007. So during 15 years we have an upside down of the media sector, a totally new technology, and that somehow strengthens threats of the democracy that are taking up because of other reasons. You already focused on some of these reasons. We have these populist movements, and there is also more and more criticism in the population that democracy might not be a good solution because it cannot resolve present political issues. That is the broad picture, I think, which everybody knows and has been described thousands of times. Now the EU reacts in 2020 with basically, I think the new commissioner, Frau von der Leyen, they are setting up a new strategy, this dialogue to get the Rechtsstaat, the legal state, rule of law state. It's also the action plan to support democracy, the action plan to support free media. These are all plans, they are not binding. However, we have more and more that is now called communications, which are for protection of journalists against targeting in advertisement, in political advertisement. And these communications are now binding if it comes to interpret the directives or regulations of the EU. So it came clear that the situation gets serious. The rhetoric was basically we have to address the situation of the media in Poland and in your country because it is no longer the standard of the European Court of Human Rights. Then, after the communication, they are now proposing directives or making regulations. You are not familiar probably with the details of EU law, but regulations are totally binding, so the member state has no room to maneuver. You just have to do what the Commission or the EU institutions are saying, and it's up to the national law courts or to the Commission to enforce the law. So this is really serious. What is not so serious, but still somehow serious, are directives, and there are a couple of directives to protect journalism, like this SLAP initiative. We can discuss this in detail, if you like. This is now supporting journalism and opening up a public space, a public democratic space. Then the other issue has been these platforms, and Istvan asked me to say some wordings about the platform regulation. We have now two tremendously important regulations in force. This is the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. The Digital Markets Act is more concerned about competitive issues. In the past, we always found out that there are some problems concerning antitrust and fair competition. For example, that the Google search engine might support Google services. That was one argument. Other arguments were concerned with the behavior of Amazon, and the European Court already applied the antitrust laws of the EU of the treaty in a way that was sanctioned in a couple of very important and well-known cases. The results of these court rulings have been somehow put into this regulation right now. So if you would like to sum it up, it's an instrument that allows to control platforms much more than before, that their behavior is fair. I'm using this wording of fairness because fairness is the aim of this competition law in general. But that is not structurally. Structurally would be that you crush down Google, or that you split Google or Facebook or whatsoever. That is not an instrument in these Digital Markets Act. The Digital Services Act is another huge important regulation, and it combines basically two pillars. One pillar is a German pillar. You might have heard this network enforcement law, and the idea of the network enforcement law is to develop internet law a little bit further. It all starts out, I think I was just professor in Münster, in 80 or something like that, or 85. We had some rulings in the US how to deal with these new internet companies. The problem was that you had now the platforms, and the platforms uploaded content not from the platforms, but from third parties, like you and me. And the problem was now, if the content of the third party, of us, is illegal, hate speech, child pornography, or whatsoever, is the platform responsible to deal with this? Is the platform responsible to keep the web clean, I would call it a little bit ironically, yeah? to clean it from illegal content? And there we had a split in the legal traditions. In the United States, it was said, no, the platforms are not responsible at all. This is this famous Article 230 of the Decency Act. And the other side was Germany, no, it was Europe, and we followed an approach that is called notice and take down. So if the platform gets a notice that there is illegal content in the web, you have to prove it, and if it is illegal, you have to take it down. So we had a practice of this notice take down approach, I think from about 20 years, and the effect was that the platforms didn't take it down. For example, my wife during that time has been prosecutor, so she constantly wrote letters to the FBI, please take this denial of Holocaust or whatsoever down, and then the FBI didn't write her back, or wrote her back saying, we have a different interpretation of freedom of speech, denial of Holocaust is not a crime in the US, so the content can keep on the platform. So Europe was trapped. They couldn't enforce the law of the member states of Europe. Consequence, how to make now this enforcement of this notice and take down approach stronger. And in this regard, the network enforcement law, but now the Digital Services Act follows the approach that, for example, let's take an example, Facebook has to name a manager who is responsible to receive the letters of my wife, yeah, so that they cannot ignore them. Then in the statute there are procedures how long they can prove and when they have to take it down. In the German setting it is rather rigid, that there is a time frame how long you have time to think about whether something is illegal or not. And then it turned out that if you take down now content of third parties, where the third parties think, no, it's great what I'm writing, yeah, it's not illegal, then there has to be this has to be dealt with this problem. In the old setting, there was no solution. Now there is a procedural solution that the third party can say, no, it's not illegal, I'm the greatest guy on earth, it's true what I'm saying, and then it will be proved, and if it's still illegal, they take it out. So that's in a nutshell this approach, the German approach that has been now transferred in the Digital Services Act, and which broadens the obligations of the platform. Then there has been in Europe another approach, that is the British approach. The British approach is more the Safety Online Act, and they are more concerned about risk assessment, and they are saying it's not good enough to clean the web. No, you have to act before, preventive, and they are saying what we need is a risk assessment. Each platform has to say there is a risk of my platform, and I'm doing in advance some precautious mechanism so that these risks cannot be fulfilled. For example, child protection, we include a specific software, yeah? Or another risk reducing mechanism is now developed in Germany, that that these AI guys find out the software to, for example, find out illegal content. Usually in Germany you had 2 policemen looking for illegal content in Germany, in Dortmund. Yeah, it's a city of 600,000 people. With 2 people you will not find so much. But now with this software, maybe you do not find 200 in a week, but 2,000, or let's rather say 20,000 possible illegal content. So you increase and improve law enforcement. And using this software would be a risk reduction mechanism. That would be probably in the future, if DSI will be implemented, one example how the second pillar of the DSA could work. So that was Ishwan's question. Now I come to my topic, and that is, but I'm actually here, yeah. Since 2020, we have this DSA and the Digital Markets Act, and now, ladies and gentlemen, the big instrument is coming, the so-called Media Freedoms Act. The Media Freedoms Act, I will make it in 3 minutes. The Media Freedoms Act addresses now, the first time, the aim of how to preserve and increase media pluralism. Again, this is all Habermas, yeah? Habermas says democracy can only work if there is a discussion among us. We can only find the best solution for the democracy if we have a debate on our views. So pluralism is a key core of our life of democracy. And that is, to preserve this mechanism is now the clear intention of the Media Freedoms Act. You see immediately from what I said before, is there any jurisdiction, is there competence for the EU? Big debate. But let's discuss about the content in a second, in a minute. One instrument is that in the Media Freedoms Act there is an increase of the protection of the media user. The media user gets now the right to access a wider range of news and content on current information. Yeah? This is a right to get this information. The problem is how to get this enforced. I keep this open. Second issue, independence of the media. There is a general rule that there is a prohibition of state interference in the media, which is in general not a realistic view if you look at a couple of countries. But if it comes to the details, it's probably more enforceable. There is a safeguarding sources of journalistic information. This is the German Quellenschutz. It's a key of independence, then there are some safeguardings of individual editorial decisions against also commercial interests. That's, for example, if the publisher comes to the journalists and saying, I would like that you write this or that. This would be now restricted, and it's heavily controversial, at least in my country. And there are other issues. Fourth issue is that the EU strengthens the European control on media markets. In general, they are trying to give some transparency rules about media ownership. In detail, quite a complex legal rule. And the last issue is that a board should be erected, that the cooperation of national regulatory authorities will be increased as well. And they get a couple of rights, these media authorities, and in general it broadens their powers. But on a very, very low level, but still there is something that happens. The question is now how the media, whether the Media Freedoms Act, which is a regulation, would be a regulation, will be come into place. In Germany at the moment we have a huge opposition of the Bundesländer, of the provinces, because you must know, and you probably know, that Germany is not a country. Germany is more or less a federation of 16 countries, and each country has a governor who is in their areas and in their competences extremely strong. If one of the provinces is saying I don't like it, then it doesn't work in the media. And we have big provinces like North Rhine-Westphalia with 18 million inhabitants, but also small ones like Bremen with 500,000 people. So Germany is by definition always blocked and cannot act. Why? Because after World War II, the military powers, US, UK, France, wanted to develop a Germany that can never become really forceful. Therefore, there is an internal blocking of different levels of the political field, which brings, or which results now in the media freedoms area to a huge blockage of the provinces. And then we come to our first talk. Is this really realistic to overcome this in a short run? Probably not. I think this whole Media Freedoms Act will be brought by the provinces to the European Court of Justice, and the courts take time to decide. So it's an open issue, but it tells you something about also our relationship to Poland, and it tells you something about the perspective of a federalistic Europe. There are still consequences of World War II in the political structure of Middle Europe. And it is not, you cannot just look at geopolitical changements, whether the presumptions of these two gentlemen are always, let's say, true. I don't know whether it is true that the US is so strong if we have in 2 years elections. I'm also not sure whether China is so strong, looking at these COVID problems and what I hear from friends in Beijing. And Russia has been, you see, Germans are very reluctant to say that Russia is defeated. Yeah, my grandfather always said Russia is defeated, and then we flew. Yeah, I'm from Poland, which is now part of Poland, and for example, to be very nasty at the end of my talk, if Poland, for example, asked for reparation in a huge sum, and my wife always comes and says, I would like to have back my castle in Wrocław, which made me as a rich man, and I would probably live on the Caribbean island. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Next time we will invite your wife as well, and she should make the presentation. Well, a very fast question to you, because I also asked the other presenters, but also because it's such an overwhelmingly exciting topic what you talked about, and not only the media, but the bigger picture as well. But focusing on the media, actually, with some other NGOs and stakeholders, we already started to initiate a new regulation at European level when we realized in Hungary what happened since 2010, and the media laws were the first European scandal which broke out after the Orbán government initiated these new regulations. And one of the issues we raised was exactly media concentration, and also the role of the media regulatory bodies. In the Hungarian case, as you probably all know, in the Media Council, there are only representatives of the ruling party. I think that was the idea of the European Commission, somehow to change it or to intervene or try to modify this. So my question is, and maybe back to the Hungarian and broader European situation, can the EU, what you talked about it, that the competencies of the European institutions are not so big on that field, can the EU help those countries, including Poland, where the governments interfere and change the rules of the game, and use market maneuvers as well to change the whole picture? And I think it's very important also because of the other issue you also mentioned, populism and polarization of the society. Everybody cries for censorship when the European Union wants to intervene. So, in a nutshell, how would you react to these problems before we start the general discussion?
The Media Freedoms Act is, I think, the Commission sells it as an instrument to change the situation in Budapest and in Warsaw. But I think the Media Freedoms Act is not so strong that it could change things in the two countries. It is just much too weak what is written in the Media Freedoms Act. You see, Germany, the Bundesländer, the provinces would be totally against the Media Freedoms Act if there would be instruments included that could really affect your country. So it is a delicate balance that the Commission has to follow. I think that the Media Freedoms Act is more, let's say, a midterm political instruments that forces us to think about the media order, and is somehow preventive, because if the gas crisis, the energy crisis really hits the societies hard, I think you show The Economist this paper. We don't know what will be the outcome in 1 year. You see, in Germany there can be still a totally shutdown of gas delivery. That would mean that universities and so on probably could not work. It's still probably there is a high probability that this can happen, and then we will have parts of our society becoming poor very quick. And how the political situation will be the end of next year, I don't know. And then if I look at the Media Freedoms Act, I look to the Ukraine. There are a couple of others, somehow states, which, if we are lucky, they get more connected to the European Commission, to Europe. And then the question is how the media order will be erected or have to be developed in these countries. And there are already negotiations between the Ukrainian government and the EU Commission. So that if somebody really would like to join the European circle, we have to make compromises on two sides. And I think that is the positive side of the Media Freedoms Act, because it gives some minimal standard and a standard to discuss what would be European values in this arena.
Okay, thank you.